So for the research I conducted, it was called the promotion of extremist ideologies within online incel communities. I am currently in my final semester at San Jose State University in their Masters of Justice Studies program. And my name is Francesca Fanucchi. So first off, a lot of you are probably thinking off the bat, this isn't going, what an incel probably is. So first thing first, an incel is just a slang for essentially men that identify as involuntarily celibate. And these are a subgroup of men on the internet that are using violence to justify their anger towards women. And essentially because the reason they do this is that they view that feminism has grown and men have kind of lost a lot of their power or sexual control over women, that they are now victims because oppressive feminism has taken away their rights or their sexual rights. So as a result, they use these ideologies of violence or discrimination to justify their anger towards women, whether it be online or offline. And this links with the theoretical framework of aggrieved entitlement. And aggrieved entitlement is using violence, or in other words, any type of act that will hurt themselves or the woman to justify retaliation, because in their mindsets, they feel that their masculinity has been shamed or threatened due to feminism, because they're no longer allowed to achieve the masculine ideals that they once had, where they were able to be in control of women in however way they like to frame it. This is still letting me do this. So the incel movement is largely found online. It can be found offline, but it's more well known through the internet. And in the early 2000s, you start to see the incel movement developing online. A lot of that due to the anonymity that it provides the internet, so they can hide behind their computer screens. You see what's called the manosphere starting to develop. And the manosphere is this online forums where you will find incel communities, whether it be there used to be on Reddit or 4chan, but now they've kind of created their own websites like incel.co, incel.net. And within these websites, they are able to express their views towards how they feel about women, and also their own frustrations of not being able to receive what they want from women, or just in general how society has let them down. And this quote over here, I think, is really important. It was by Kimmel and Maller, and they actually did a study on incels. They wrote a book about just kind of their ideologies and what their culture was about. And they talk about how shame, inadequacy, and vulnerability all threaten the self, and essentially how violence in this situation could be restorative. So to these men, they feel that their masculinity has been diminished, and through violence, they're able to restore what they have lost. And so the photo I have on the right is actually one of their main theories, which they call red pill, blue pill theory. And that actually comes from the Matrix. And so a lot of people find that quite funny, but the way that they see it is the red pill is, if you take the pill, you are recognizing that feminism has taken rights away from you and you want to do something about it. Where the blue pill is actually, you realize what's going on, but you're choosing just to ignore it and live your life. You're upset, but you're ignoring it. And so it's this kind of idea of like, which way are you going to go and which way you're going to choose. So overall, the aim of this research was, as you start to see these online forums, there is a risk for self-radicalization. When you have an echo chamber of this radical misogynistic content and people are going on and they have like-minded views, they're reinforcing each other's ideals. And these ideals, most typically that are seen offline, is not acceptable. When they go online and they find these groups, they are able to reinforce their beliefs. And as a result, this can lead them to radicalization, or essentially polarizing their views, and they can become more extreme. However, a lot of academic research has failed to theorize and examine this evolution of the phenomenon through technological platforms, specifically how these subgroups have evolved online and how their ideals are growing and spreading more across different nations now, not just within the United States as the internet grows. So to start this, the data that we obtained for this looked at specifically incels.co, which is one of the largest incel-based websites. There definitely is a lot of incel groups within Reddit and 4chan. However, for the basis of this study, I thought it'd be interesting to look at incel.co because, people are actively seeking these sites. They have an intention for what they want to go on there for. So the amount of posts that we looked at around 5 million user posts. The data that we obtained came from Associate Professor Dr. Richard Frank from Simon Fraser University. He obtained it through what we call a web crawler technology, which is essentially an automated data collection tool. It's normally used to examine extremist content online. And he used that same technology to actually obtain Incel posts from incel.co. And overall, we had about 8,000 usernames or individuals that we were looking at, but in total, there was over 5 million user posts. And after we collected the data through the web crawling technology, we input it into what we call a natural language processor. And what the natural language processor would essentially do is it's like a program that can analyze each of the posts to see what is the frequency of words used within all of them. And the hope with this is, as we're looking at what radical or essentially extremist content is being posted online, how is the sentiment evolving? So we wanted to look at the sentiment. We wanted to look at the terminology being used within the sites. So with the output that was produced from the NLP, with the Excel sheets that would have the frequency of words, we created keywords lists. And the keywords lists were formulated with different ideologies within the incel community. And so these were the 5 keywords lists that we created. As you can see on the left, that's a sample of our hegemonic masculinity list. So that's kind of around the language of how men, they perceive themselves, how they perceive women, how they perceive their own physical appearance, which is a huge thing within their masculine ideals. And there was a lot of different kind of themes within it. And so the whole idea with these ones, we can kind of analyze how these essentially these categories or themes within the incel community over time, or the sentiment changes. So after we obtained our keywords list, we input it into what we call a sentiment analysis software. And so for me, the best way to kind of explain a sentiment analysis software is, if you ever received a text message and you're not really sure what the message says, and you kind of look at it and you're like, the way that you analyze it is through the words around it. You know, if you notice someone puts a period or a certain type of exclamation point, or just the words they use, you can assess whether it's a positive or negative message. And that's essentially what sentiment analysis does. It takes the word and it analyzes the words around it to see the amount of negative or positive sentiment. So you receive a sentiment score, whether it be negative or positive. And with this, the hope that we could do is, by analyzing the sentiment pathways of these posts on incel.co, we can kind of see how users' attitudes and opinions change over time, whether they become increasingly more negative. And on top of that, also looking at how their posting behavior changes over time. So although we're able to see what the sentiment is, you're wondering, okay, how are we going to analyze this over time? How are we going to see this change? And with that, we would use what we call a group-based trajectory modeling. So before we could import it into the group-based trajectory modeling, we had to use an algorithm, a SERA algorithm. And what the SERA algorithm would do is take our sentiment scores and then give an overall radical score. So that radical score could be used to assess not only what the amount of posts they're posting that are negative, the severity of the post, and also the volume over time. And with that, when we input our SERA code or SERA number into our group-based trajectory model, we're able to identify and categorize over time the specific groups that show that particular sentiment over time. And group-based trajectory theory isn't commonly used. It's actually most famously known by Sampson and Lobb, where they actually analyze the criminal life course over time. So you know how people's criminal career change. So if they started off offending very high in their youth and they would drop down, as you can see on the right, that's a chart of what it actually looks like. So looking at the criminal pathways of a criminal career. And with the group-based trajectory modeling, they could see what people's trajectories, right? So if they started offending very high and then they dropped, or they started offending and pretty high and they stayed the same. And that's pretty much what we're hoping to do with the sentiment that we achieved through our SERA algorithm. So overall, from the data we have right now, our findings are preliminary. We've only run a few analyses on some of the keywords lists, but at the moment we've done it for the aggrieved entitlement keywords list and our mental health and suicide. So the aggrieved entitlement keywords list is going to show a lot of that anguish of retaliation towards women. So things that are associated with violence, whether it be murder, kill, assault, all these ideas of harming women. And within our aggrieved entitlement keywords list, with our group-based trajectory modeling, our best fit model came out with 5 different types of trajectories. So there's 5 different groups of people that we analyze within that model. And as you can see, the group that we're interested in is the group 1, which is the dark blue line here. And what's interesting about that is you see a group that started off with their sentiment score, their overall radical score being at 0. So their sentiment is quite low. But as time goes on, it slowly starts to escalate, which is really interesting. You're probably thinking, okay, yeah, that's only 8.2% of that sample. But however, if you think about it in the case of over 5 million user posts, that's quite a lot of people with 8,000 users, and you have 8% that are showing that. That's around 100 people that are concerned. And where the concern, however, comes in is in our mental health list. And the reason I included the mental health list, and that's with keywords that are looking at, the individual wanting to harm themselves, because with aggrieved entitlement, it's very common that a lot of men that as a final act of aggrieved entitlement, to achieve their masculine ideals, they'll actually commit suicide or harm themselves. So if you have a subgroup of men, as you can see in this group, which is a separate group, right? They came out with 4 different trajectories. The sentiment is definitely more severe over time. They start from 0 and they become very clear that they are suicidal increasingly over time in this group. And that's 19.5% of those 8,000 user posts. And the group that we're interested in are the group that crossed over between the two. So who are the individuals, not only that their sentiment increases in aggrieved entitlement, but then they're also at the risk of wanting to harm themselves. And as a result, would that lead them to cause an act where they not only harm other people, but themselves? So overall, the research implications of what we're looking at is trying to show not only media sources, but academic sources that these acts of violence produced by incels are not just random acts of violence. They're very premeditated. You can see as time as that they build online. And that's very clear in the 2 photos I'm showing. That's Alex Manassian and Elliot Rodger. So Elliot Rodger and Alex Manassian are well-known incel offenders. Both of them committed atrocious acts towards women or civilians. Alex Manassian ran a bus in Toronto into a crowd, and Elliot Rodger committed a mass shooting within Santa Barbara. And both of them, they murdered tons of people, and they actually had a very active presence online within incel communities. Elliot Rodger on the bottom here actually posted his manifesto online and was actively involved in these incel Reddit groups, where Alex Manassian had posted on Facebook about how he idolized Elliot Rodger and that he was proclaiming that he is fulfilling the incel movement. So, these are 2 men that people saw as random acts of violence, but actually there was an examples that they had premeditation in their acts, and hoping that with our sentiment analysis, we can see that. And then the hope later on down the line is by creating these group trajectories and seeing how people sentiment changes within incel groups, that we can kind of develop typologies and understanding the different types of individuals that would go onto these sites, right? Are they going on and they starting their sentiment grows, but their sentiment's high and it remains high, or they go on and then it starts to decline? And we want to see why they're on there. What is their sentiment? How different keyword lists, or are they on there because they're insecure about their presence and women won't sleep with them? Or is it more that they are upset and they want to cause violence? And so that's the end. But thank you so much for letting me present, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity. And yeah, thank you.